you think similar identification requirements should apply to voting?
Well, I don't accept the premise of your question because we actually have, you got to show ID to vote in Virginia right now. You can't walk in and vote and say, I'm Mark Warner or Joe Jones. You got to show an official ID, like a driver's license, or if you don't have a driver's license, you have to bring other documents showing where you live, and then you put in a provisional category. This SAVE Act, and by the way, our IDs have become more and more driver's licenses. You have the kind of real ID component, but this SAVE Act, which I strongly oppose, would require you got to show your birth certificate. You got to show your passport. Most Americans, I think it's only about 50-50 now in terms of the number of Americans that have a passport. You talk about how this would disenfranchise folks. Folks in rural communities have a much lower percentage of passports. You're going to say to folks in South Side and Southwest, you don't get to vote because you never got a passport or you don't have your birth certificate. And you as what also ought to be, I think, just insulting is, you got to bring your birth certificate. God forbid you've got married and changed your name. This is outright discrimination against women who choose to change their name when they get married. So this is not a valid effort. I strongly oppose it. And as documents after documents, investigation after investigation shows, the number of non-citizens trying to vote is so minuscule. And I think after, I can't remember, was it 24, 20, it was like nationwide, millions and tens of millions of things were looked at, and they were like in the tens, not in the hundreds, but I believe in the tens, the number of people who actually were non-citizens that voted. I honestly think we ought to get more Americans registered to vote. I think we'd have a stronger democracy if more people voted. And I guess I'm old school. I still remember when things like motor voter, making it easier to register when you get your driver's license or government offices, was broadly bipartisan. And I sure as heck hope we could get back to that.
Our next question is from Regina with Wavy.
Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you so much for taking my call. I have a couple of questions involving the media, but the military in Hampton Roads. Number one, we learned today that border officers fired an anti-drone laser on what turned out to be a balloon without consulting the FAA. Imagine if that had happened in Oceana, the Oceana area. Number two, a Marine from the USS Iwo Jima fell overboard missing at sea. The Norfolk-based Truxtun and the USNS Supply collided yesterday during an UNREP, known as an underway rep, when they're transferring supplies back and forth. I have said before to other members of Congress, it appears the Navy, which has lost several aircraft recently, has forgotten how to be the Navy. Comment on that and also the border situation with El Paso.
Yeah, thank you for both questions. Anytime we lose a sailor, it's a great tragedy. And I pray that he's recovered, but obviously we may have lost another American patriot. And you're right, we've seen planes fall off aircraft carriers. We've seen now this description of these ships colliding, my understanding. And I just got a quick report on this, so I need to get all my facts straight. But my understanding is that it was off the coast of Venezuela. We got close to 20% of our fleet off the coast of Venezuela. A lot of those ships home ported in Norfolk. How long are they going to be there? It takes that many to kind of, remember the bad guys are still in charge in Venezuela. It takes that many to try to quarantine and blockade Venezuelan oil from getting out. Are they going to be on a long-term deployment? Many of them have been down there literally for months already. And as great as our Navy is, it still gets stretched. We think back a couple of weeks ago when the Iranian people went to the street trying to throw off that repressive regime. And the president didn't have all of the assets that if he wanted to take a strike against Iran, he couldn't because the aircraft carrier that was normally there was off the coast of Venezuela. Now we've taken an aircraft carrier from the Indo-Pacific and moved it into the region. The president's talking about a second one. But this kind of lack of a theory of the case and how we're not going to overstretch the Navy is a huge concern. And I also go back to, on the Iranian situation, all these things are interconnected. One of the reasons why we couldn't bring more pressure at that moment when the people in Iran were out in the streets and literally thousands of them were killed by this repressive regime, we couldn't get our European allies to help us because they were focused on Trump's effort to break up NATO and potentially threaten Greenland. So these kind of activities, I think, make America less safe, stretches the resources of the world's best Navy, our Navy. And I fear when you're on these long deployments, and as I got to get more details on this, but if they were moving things from one ship to another, I'm not going to comment on full causation, but when you've got people deployed this long, it takes a toll. It takes a toll not only on the ships, but it takes a toll on the brave men and women who are sailors. So I want to get more information. On the other, oh my gosh, this is the Keystone Cops. We are developing, and this is now in the public domain, laser weapons that could shoot down drones. And it is a tool of modern warfare. We need to have that. We see the enormous power of drones being used in Ukraine. But what happened was, I believe the weapon was lent to the Customs and Border Patrol. They wanted to test it out. But funny thing happened on the process of testing. They didn't tell the FAA. So they're doing this because they didn't communicate, or they're having a bureaucratic effort. And not only did they shut down air traffic, traditional air traffic, they were shutting down emergency. They were, somebody's got hurt and you've got to fly an emergency helicopter. It was shut down. So this is incompetence. And as you said, my God, if this was happening in Hampton Roads, the amount of air traffic we have, not just commercial, but obviously military, if some part of our government is using and testing a weapon without telling the folks who are supposed to be in charge of air traffic control safety, that is a recipe for disaster. And thank God, in the circumstance in El Paso, that all they shot down was a balloon. And my understanding, I've heard reports that it was not even a weather balloon, but it was a party balloon. So, instead of this administration trying to pursue political retribution against the president's political enemies, maybe trying to have a little more focus on the operations of our government and making sure that one branch of government is talking to another would make Americans a heck of a lot safer, and maybe focusing on bringing down costs, which he promised and has done virtually nothing on, instead, in effect, raising costs with these crazy tariffs, might be a way to now take the president out of these record low approval ratings.
Our final question is from Angela with Hampton Roads Messenger.
Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you for taking my question. My question is regarding the joint resolution terminating the national emergency declared tariffs imposed duties on articles imported from Canada. Do you know if there are any efforts in Congress to repeal tariffs on any other countries in addition to Canada?
Yes, ma'am, and I appreciate you being on the call. We've now said, Congress has said bipartisan, we don't want the tariffs on Canada because it's a tax on Americans. And it also, Canada is one of our strongest allies. We've now turned Canada almost into an adversary because of this president's actions. Senator Kaine has also brought tariff proposals against the tariffs on Mexico, on Brazil. I know there's going to be a number of these other actions in the House. I think they're teed up. There's got to be a period of waiting, but I think we're going to see a lot of votes in the House take place. We've seen tariffs, for example. Let me give you two other examples. One on India. We spent years trying to make India a closer ally. And India ended up with, at one point, they've been reduced supposedly, although we've got no documentation, up to 50% on Indian tariffs because he was simply mad that the Prime Minister there, Modi, didn't say he deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. Pathetic. We've got tariffs. We raised tariffs on Australia. We are building submarines with Australia that helps everybody in Hampton Roads. We've got a trade surplus with Australia. It's one of our strongest allies, yet we still whacked them with a tariff. No economist of the right mind would say this kind of tariff policy with no reason. You want to bring more tariffs against China that cheats on so many things, steals intellectual property? Let's talk about that. But instead, we're tariffing disproportionately our friends, and in many cases, driving them to do more trade with China than with us. And I'm